New Orleans, 1918. A city of jazz, streetlights, and late-night footsteps. People said this town never slept because music floated through the air even after midnight. But that year, something else stayed awake too. Something dark, someone unseen. At first, it felt like a rumor, a strange attack in a home, a family harmed in their sleep. The police had no clear suspect, no clear motive. The weapon wasn't fancy, it was brutal and personal, an axe, often taken from the victim's own house. And slowly, fear began to replace music. The first reports spread fast, but details stayed confusing. Some witnesses described a shadow. Others said they heard nothing at all, just silence before the screaming. In New Orleans, people were used to danger, but this felt different. This wasn't a robbery. Money was often left behind, valuables untouched. The killer came for something else, something no one could explain. Doors were forced open, sometimes by cutting panels or slipping through weak locks. It was like the attacker knew exactly how homes were built. Soon, families began sleeping lighter, and every creak at night felt like a warning. Neighbors started checking on each other more than usual. People locked windows twice. They pulled curtains tighter. Some bought guns. Some prayed harder. Some stayed up all night, sitting in chairs, waiting. The police worked the cases, but New Orleans in 1918 didn't have modern forensics. No DNA, no security cameras, no phone tracking, just footprints, broken doors, and terrified survivors. And survivors had one thing in common. They described the attack as sudden, violent, and fast. The killer didn't speak, didn't leave a name, but he left something worse: panic. The newspapers tried to stay careful at first. They didn't want hysteria, but the public demanded answers. Who is doing this? People asked. Why? The attacks continued. Different neighborhoods, different families, yet the same terrifying pattern. Homes were entered late at night. Victims were attacked while asleep. Sometimes 2 people were hurt. Sometimes only 1 survived. Police began connecting the crimes, realizing this wasn't random. It was a series. A predator moving through the city like a ghost. And if the town never slept, then neither did the fear. By early 1919, the city had changed. Streets felt colder. Even the music in the clubs sounded tense. People still danced, but their eyes watched doors more than stages. Then, something happened that pushed fear into a new level. A letter arrived. A message. It wasn't a police report. It wasn't a witness statement. It was a claim from the killer himself. A letter sent to the newspaper, written with confidence, like the city belonged to him. And the words inside would make New Orleans hold its breath together. The letter didn't just threaten violence. It announced it like an event, like a performance. It said a night was coming, a specific night, a specific time, and the writer promised he would strike again. But then the letter offered something strange, something almost impossible. He claimed he would spare any home where jazz music was playing. Not prayers, not locks, not police presence, only jazz. For New Orleans, jazz was life. Now it became a shield, and the city was forced to ask, was this real or a cruel game? People argued everywhere. Barber shops, churches, street corners. Some said the letter was a prank, a newspaper stunt, a fake. But others remembered the bodies, the blood, the shattered doors. This wasn't funny. Police couldn't confirm the author. They couldn't trace it. But they couldn't ignore it either. Because if it was real, then the killer was warning them. Not out of mercy, but out of power. He wanted the city to prepare. He wanted the city to fear him more than death itself. The night named in the letter approached like a storm cloud. Families made plans. Some left town. Some crowded into relatives' homes. Some sat in groups with weapons in hand. And musicians? They were suddenly more important than police. Jazz bands were booked everywhere. Clubs overflowed. House parties formed on every block. Even people who hated jazz turned on radios and phonographs. Anything for noise, anything for protection. New Orleans didn't sleep that night. It played, loud, desperate, as if music could hold back a killer's hands. That night became legendary because it felt unreal. Streets filled with sound, trumpets, drums, pianos, laughter that didn't feel natural. The city was pretending it wasn't scared. But fear was underneath every note. Some said they saw strangers walking at night, watching homes. Others swore they heard footsteps on porches. Police patrolled non-stop, but they couldn't be everywhere. It only takes one unlocked door, one quiet alley, one unguarded window. And the killer had already proven he needed very little to enter a home. Morning came. People survived. The city exhaled. No confirmed murders happened that night, the letter promised. Some celebrated, saying jazz had saved them. Others said it proved the letter was fake. But the fear didn't disappear, because the pattern of attacks didn't end forever. New Orleans had learned a horrible truth. Safety could feel real and still be an illusion. The killer was still out there, somewhere. And now he had done something even worse than murder. He had controlled the city's behavior with nothing but a letter. In true crime history, this is where the legend grows. The unknown attacker became a name people whispered, the Axeman. Not because he carried a special axe, but because he used what was close, and that made him even more terrifying. He didn't need preparation. He didn't need tools from home. He could turn your home into the weapon. Police followed leads. Some suspects were arrested. Most were released. The killer left no signature except brutality. And in 1919, the city had no way to stop a shadow. Some historians believe the famous letter may not have been written by the real killer. There are theories it was a hoax or a publicity stunt. But here's what matters. Whether the letter was real or not, the killings were real. People died. Families were destroyed. And the fear that covered New Orleans was real, too. That fear changed how people lived, how they slept, how they trusted. Even after the attack stopped, the memory stayed. Because when a killer attacks sleeping people, Safety itself becomes suspicious. And once you lose trust in the night, you never truly rest again. Some survivors described waking up to pain and darkness. Others only remembered the smell, like wood splintering, sweat, and blood. A few said the killer moved quickly, almost silently. There was no warning, no confrontation, only sudden violence. Many victims were working-class families, people who couldn't afford the strongest locks, the safest neighborhoods, or private guards. This made the fear even worse, because it proved the killer could choose anyone, not just the rich, not just the poor, anyone who had a door, anyone who had to sleep, which meant everyone. Imagine being a police officer in 1919 New Orleans. No DNA labs, no fingerprint databases like today. No street cameras. The city was crowded, loud, and constantly moving. A criminal could disappear into crowds in minutes. And the Axeman's attacks happened in private, behind closed doors. By the time anyone heard screams, it was too late. Police had to rely on witnesses who were traumatized, or on neighbors who saw a man, a shadow, someone tall, someone fast. Descriptions so vague they could fit hundreds of people. And the killer understood that advantage perfectly. Soon, rumors began growing like weeds. People accused outsiders. They blamed immigrants. They blamed rival gangs. Some said the murders were connected to organized crime. Others believed it was something supernatural. Fear makes people invent explanations when the truth feels too heavy. But the real truth was simpler and scarier. Sometimes a human being does terrible things without a reason anyone can understand. And sometimes they aren't caught. The Axeman case became part of American true crime history because it shows how fragile society can feel when one unknown person proves they can enter homes at will. That kind of fear spreads faster than any disease. New Orleans survived because cities always survive. People went back to work. Music returned to normal. But families never forgot. Parents told children, lock the door. Husbands told wives, don't stay up alone. Neighbors started recognizing footsteps and voices on their streets. And in the quiet, when jazz faded, the mind replayed those nights. Because the Axeman wasn't just a killer. He was a reminder that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it knocks softly. Sometimes it doesn't knock at all. It simply enters and changes everything. Years later, people still debated the truth. Was it one killer or multiple? Was the letter authentic or fake? There were suspects. Men questioned, names written down in old police records. But nothing became a final answer. And that's why this story still attracts listeners today, especially in America, where unsolved cases become legends. People want closure. They want justice. But some stories don't give it. Instead, they leave a shadow behind, a mystery that grows colder with time. In the Axeman story, the question isn't just who was he, it's also how did he vanish so completely? And that question still keeps people awake. Now imagine you live there in 1919. Your window is cracked open for air. The street outside is quiet. You hear the distant sound of a piano from a bar far away. Then silence. Your house settles, the normal creaks of wood and walls. But tonight, those sounds feel different. You stare at your bedroom door, knowing it could open at any moment. You listen for a footstep that may never come. And the worst part is the waiting, because waiting is where fear lives the longest. The Axeman didn't only kill people. He made thousands of others live inside a nightmare without ever touching them. Some true crime experts believe the Jazz Letter became famous partly because it was so theatrical. It sounded like the writer wanted attention. And killers like attention. They love control. They love watching society react. Even today, criminals sometimes contact media for the same reason. But whether it was written by the Axeman or not, it created a moment that history remembers. A whole American city playing music as protection. A city turning fear into noise. And in a strange way, that's what humans do when they feel powerless. We sing, we gather, we create light. Because the alternative, silence, feels like surrender. There's something uniquely terrifying about crimes committed at night, in homes. During the day, danger feels like something outside, but at night, danger feels like something that can walk into your bedroom. The Axeman case became a symbol of that fear. It wasn't just murder, it was invasion, and the invasion left scars far beyond the victims. Even people who were never attacked began to develop habits, checking locks 3 times, sleeping with lights on, listening for the smallest sounds. That kind of fear doesn't fade quickly. It becomes part of you. And long after the Axeman disappeared, New Orleans carried that fear like a quiet bruise. In modern America, we often believe technology keeps us safe. Cameras, alarms, police databases. But the Axeman story reminds us that fear doesn't need technology to exist. Fear needs uncertainty. And uncertainty was everywhere in those years. When no one knows who the killer is, anyone could be him. A friendly neighbor, a quiet stranger, a man passing you on the sidewalk. People started watching each other more than ever. Trust weakened. Suspicion grew stronger. And that's the hidden damage of an unsolved killer. They don't only harm victims, they poison communities. They change how people look at each other forever. The city tried to return to normal, but normal felt fake. You could still hear trumpets, still smell food from street vendors, still see couples laughing outside clubs. But behind that life was the memory of broken doors and blood on bedroom floors. The past became part of the night air. And when someone mentioned the name Axeman, people's faces changed instantly. A small pause, a glance around the room, like speaking his name might invite him back. Even now, a century later, that name still feels heavy, because the story isn't just about violence. It's about vulnerability. It's about how quickly a town can stop sleeping and how hard it is to ever sleep deeply again. Some people made jokes to cope. Dark jokes, nervous laughter. It's what humans do when reality becomes too sharp. But behind those jokes were mothers who held children closer, fathers who sat awake with weapons. You have to understand, in 1919, the night belonged to the streets, and the streets belonged to mystery. If something happened, help might not arrive in time, so people depended on neighbors, on community, on sound. That's why the jazz night became so powerful, because it was community protection, a city refusing to be silent. Even if the music didn't stop the killer, it gave people something else, a feeling of unity, a feeling that they weren't alone in the dark. But unity doesn't last forever, not under constant fear. Eventually, exhaustion wins. People must sleep, jobs must be done, children must go to school. And the killer, if he was still out there, only needed one moment of weakness. That's the cruel math of terror. The community must stay strong every night. The predator only needs one night. That imbalance is what makes serial cases so haunting, because it feels unfair, it feels inevitable. The Axeman case didn't give the public a clean ending. Instead, it slowly faded into history, like footsteps walking away down a quiet road. And maybe that's the scariest ending of all. Not a capture, not a confession, but silence. A monster leaving the stage without ever taking a bow. Years later, writers and filmmakers turned the Axeman story into fiction, myths, and horror tales. But at its core, it remains grounded in reality. Attacks happened, and fear spread across a real American city. And the letter, whether real or fake, still holds a chilling place in American true crime culture. Because it shows how fragile control can be. A single message made an entire city change its behavior overnight. That kind of power doesn't come from strength. It comes from psychology, from knowing humans fear the unknown more than the known. People can handle bad news if it's clear, but an invisible threat, that keeps you awake. That makes you listen to every sound. That turns the night into a question you can't answer. In America, unsolved cases often become legends because Americans love the idea of the mystery until they live inside one. The Axeman story is both history and warning. It warns us that safety is never guaranteed, and it warns us that sometimes the truth slips away. Old evidence disappears, witnesses die, memories fade, and what's left is a story with missing pages. But even missing pages can still frighten people, because the mind fills in the blanks with worst possibilities. When a killer is never caught, the story never truly ends. It stays open, like a door that was never fully shut. And that door leads back into the dark streets of a city that once played jazz just to survive the night. Imagine the newspaper office when the letter arrived. A writer opens it, reads it twice. His hands go cold. Because it isn't a normal threat. It reads like something confident, like something enjoying itself. He knows if he publishes it, fear will explode. But if he doesn't publish it and the killer strikes, the city will blame the newspaper for hiding a warning. So the letter becomes public. And in that moment, the Axeman, real or fake, wins something important: attention. Attention is oxygen to fear, and fear is oxygen to power. That is why the letter still matters, because it was a psychological attack on an entire city, not just a single home. And it worked. That night of jazz wasn't just music. It was survival behavior. Homes turned into small fortresses of sound. People played records until needles wore down. Families crowded together, refusing to be alone. The streets felt alive, almost like a festival, but no one celebrated. They were performing courage. And courage, when forced, feels fragile. The Axeman story reminds us that fear changes culture. It changes music, it changes nightlife, it changes relationships. It even changes what people consider normal. A quiet street became suspicious. A silent home became a target. A simple bedtime became a risk. And once bedtime turns into danger, the mind never relaxes the same way again. In modern true crime storytelling, we often focus on the killer. But the real heart of these stories is the community, the victims, the survivors, the families. New Orleans didn't deserve that terror. No one does. And yet, like many cities in American history, it had to carry tragedy and still continue living. That's what makes this story feel so human. It's not just about the Axeman's shadow. It's about a city's heartbeat, refusing to stop. Even under fear, New Orleans kept playing music, kept working, kept loving. And in that way, the town that never slept became something else, a town that refused to die, even when death was knocking at doors. There are people today who still visit New Orleans and ask about the Axeman. Tour guides mention him, historians debate him, because mystery is a kind of magnet. But behind the mystery were real nights of blood and terror, real families who never got answers. That's why we must tell these stories carefully, without turning pain into entertainment. The Axeman case is remembered not just because it was scary, but because it was unresolved. And unresolved cases feel like unfinished sentences. The human brain craves endings. It craves justice. When justice doesn't come, people keep listening, keep searching, keep telling the story. And that's why you are hearing it now, long after the streets went quiet again. If you had lived there, you might have done what others did. Sleeping in shifts, keeping lamps burning, placing furniture against doors, leaving radios on all night. Small actions to fight a big fear. And maybe you would have realized something painful. There's only so much you can control. The Axeman showed that randomness can be terrifying. He didn't need a reason you could understand. He didn't need to send warnings. He didn't need to be seen. He only needed opportunity. And opportunity exists in every city, every night. That's why this story feels like a warning to Americans even today. Because danger doesn't belong to the past. It only changes its clothing. And sometimes it still walks in the dark, looking for a door that isn't locked well enough. When historians look back, they see the Axeman as part of a larger truth. America has always had stories where fear and mystery collide. From unsolved disappearances to unknown killers, our history contains shadows we never fully explained. And every time a new case appears today, people remember older ones like this, because the pattern repeats. confusion, panic, suspicion, then silence. But New Orleans was special. It didn't just fear the night, it answered it with music. That detail is unforgettable. A killer says, "Play jazz and I won't kill," and the city responds, "Then we will play." It's strange, it's tragic, it's powerful, and it proves that even under threat, humans will find ways to push back, sometimes with weapons, sometimes with sound, and sometimes with hope. Over time, the Axeman became more than a case file. He became a symbol of unanswered terror. But let's not forget, the victims were ordinary people, not famous, not protected, not expecting history to enter their homes. That's the cruelty of real-life horror. It chooses normal lives, people who had plans for tomorrow, people who had children, people who believed they were safe at home. When something like this happens, it steals more than life. It steals the feeling of being protected in your own space. In America, we often say, home is where you're safe. The Axeman shattered that belief. And a broken belief is hard to repair. Even after the killer stops, the fear stays in the walls. And then, slowly, the stories become whispers. A grandmother tells a granddaughter, "Your great-grandparents used to play jazz all night because of a killer." A man at a bar laughs and says, "That town never slept, not after the Axeman." A tour guide points to a street and says, "This is where fear lived." Time turns terror into history, but history doesn't mean harmless, because fear can echo. It can travel through generations. Even if you've never seen a crime, your body can still react to stories of one. That's why true stories like this are powerful for American listeners. They remind us that the past was real. It wasn't fiction. People truly lay awake at night listening to music, hoping sound could keep death away. And that's a thought that still chills the heart. If you're listening to this at night, the story may feel even closer. The darkness outside your window might feel deeper. The quiet in your room might feel heavier. That's the strange effect of real stories. They shrink the distance between then and now. The Axeman story teaches something uncomfortable, that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like nothing at all, just a presence you never see. And that's why people locked their doors, stayed together, and played jazz like it was a spell against something human, something real. In a town that never slept, the people didn't stay awake for fun, they stayed awake to survive. And when morning came, they didn't celebrate. They simply thanked the sun for arriving again, because sunrise felt like safety. Eventually, the Axeman faded from active headlines. No dramatic courtroom trial, no public confession, no confirmed identity. Just a quiet end to a terrifying chapter. And that's rare in storytelling, because audiences want endings, but real life doesn't always deliver them. Some cases remain unsolved forever, and when they do, they become like a locked box with no key. People shake it, listen to it, imagine what's inside, but the truth stays trapped. The Axeman case is that locked box, a real American mystery wrapped in real pain. And the letter, whether true or fake, still feels like a voice from the darkness, reminding us that fear can spread faster than facts. All it takes is one message to make a city tremble, one threat to turn bedtime into a battle. Here's what makes this story so effective for American audiences. It's not just violence, it's atmosphere. New Orleans already had an identity: music, nightlife, mystery, culture. Then fear slid into that identity and changed it. People still went out at night, but they watched shadows more carefully. They listened to footsteps longer. And even the jazz, normally joyful, became defensive. That is the haunting part, a beautiful sound being used like a shield. In our modern world, we think of shields as metal, police, alarms, but New Orleans used community and music. And that tells us something powerful about humanity. We fight fear with whatever we have. Sometimes all we have is each other, and sometimes all we have is a song. Many years later, people still argue over one question. If the Axeman really wrote the letter, why did he stop that night? Was he satisfied? Did he leave the city? Did he get caught for something else? Did he die? Or was the letter written by someone else entirely? We may never know. But the point isn't only the letter. The point is the fear that already existed before it. The killings came first. The terror came first. The city was already wounded. The letter simply poured salt into that wound. It made fear organized, scheduled, public. And when fear becomes public, it becomes contagious. People look at each other differently. They start preparing for disaster that might come at any moment. And once you live like that, peace feels impossible. That's why the story remains unforgettable, because it shows how an unseen killer can shape an entire city's soul. Some listeners ask, why do people love true crime? The answer is complicated. Sometimes it's curiosity. Sometimes it's education. Sometimes it's the need to feel prepared. Stories like this one, based on real historical fear, teach us what danger can look like. Not always loud, not always obvious. Sometimes danger is simply a quiet pattern, a night attack, a forced door, a vanished criminal. The Axeman case became part of American cultural memory because it feels like a nightmare that could happen anywhere. Any city, any neighborhood, any family. And when something feels possible, people pay attention. They listen carefully. They imagine what they would do. Would you leave town? Would you play music? Would you stay awake? And that question alone proves the killer's power still lives in the imagination of anyone who hears the story. New Orleans eventually returned to being New Orleans. Jazz became joy again. Streets became normal again. But normal is always temporary. History shows us that danger can rise in any era. That's why the Axeman story still feels modern, because the unknown still exists. Even today, police across America face cases where someone harms people and disappears. Technology helps, but it doesn't solve everything. And the human mind is still the same as it was in 1919. It fears the dark. It fears uncertainty. It fears what it can't see. That's why the Axeman remains one of the most chilling American legends rooted in real events. Not because we know everything about him, but because we don't. Mystery is a doorway, and fear loves walking through it. And once fear enters, it makes even familiar rooms feel strange. If you close your eyes right now, picture the city that night. The warm air, the street lamps, the distant laughter. Then picture the quiet street outside your home. A shadow moving slowly, a door panel being forced, a sound so small you might mistake it for the house settling, and then nothing until it's too late. That's what made the Axeman terrifying. He didn't announce himself. He didn't challenge people in the street. He entered private spaces, and in those spaces, people are defenseless. It's the oldest kind of fear, being attacked where you're supposed to be safe. That fear doesn't fade with time. It lives inside the oldest parts of the human brain. And that's why listeners still feel chills when they hear the name. Because the story taps into something universal, something primal, something that whispers, "Lock the door, stay awake, listen." Some might say, it was so long ago. Why does it matter now? It matters because history teaches patterns. It teaches what communities do under threat. It teaches how rumors spread. It teaches how fear can become stronger than evidence. The Axeman story shows how a city reacts when it cannot identify danger. Some people blamed each other. Some turned to police. Some turned to music. But everyone felt the same thing at night: uncertainty. And uncertainty is one of the most exhausting emotions a human can carry, because you can't fight what you can't find. You can't prepare perfectly for what you don't understand. So you improvise. You play jazz. You keep lights on. You hold your loved ones closer. And you pray for morning. That is what New Orleans did. And that is why the town never slept. Not because it loved nightlife, but because it feared the dark. True crime isn't meant to be enjoyed like a game. It's meant to be remembered carefully, because every case is built on real suffering. When we tell the Axeman story, we're not celebrating the killer. We're remembering the victims, the survivors, and the city that endured it. And we're acknowledging a truth many Americans forget. Justice isn't guaranteed. Sometimes killers are caught quickly. Sometimes they're never caught at all. The Axeman remained unknown, and that uncertainty became part of the terror. It left people with questions they could never answer. And questions can haunt longer than facts. The killer's name faded, but the city's fear became legend, and legends can last longer than lifetimes. That's why, even now, a letter from a killer can still shake people, because words can terrify a mind as deeply as weapons can terrify a body. And once fear is planted, it grows quietly, especially at night. So what is the real lesson of A Letter from a Killer, the town that never slept? It's not just that a killer existed. It's that fear can control crowds. It can rewrite routines. It can change an entire city's soundscape. New Orleans responded with jazz, not because it was magical, but because it was the one thing that made them feel less alone. In a way, the city fought back with life. That's the most human response possible. When facing death, choose to be louder, choose to gather, choose to create light. And even though the killer was never truly identified, the city proved something. Terror can damage people, but it doesn't always break them. New Orleans bent under fear, but it didn't collapse. And that resilience, more than the killer, should be remembered. Because real stories should remind us of both darkness and strength. And the strength is what helps us sleep again. Tonight, as you prepare to rest, remember this. The people of New Orleans lived through nights when sleep felt impossible. They heard rumors, saw fear in neighbors' eyes, and wondered if they would be next. And still, they survived. They played music, they stayed together, they carried on. The Axeman may have disappeared into history, but the lesson remains. We are fragile, yes, but we are also resilient. And sometimes the only way to fight the darkness is not with a weapon, but with a light, a sound, a friend beside you, and the courage to face another night. This story is based on real events from the early 1900s and the famous Axeman letter linked to New Orleans fear and jazz culture. Sleep gently, and if the night feels too quiet, maybe let a little music play.